Welcome to Living with Dr. Monica Shah, where we discuss different ways of living our lives and finding fulfillment in a world that often pushes a single version of success, timeline, and identity. Living fully means honoring your truth, and charting our own path on a road less traveled can feel hard. Whether you've chosen a non-traditional life or life chose it for you, this show is here to support your journey and remind you that you're not alone. My next guest is Dimple Dhabalia. Dimple and I were connected through a friend who thought, and I quote, "A conversation between the two of you could be quite extraordinary." She was right. Dimple on her own has led an extraordinary life, and in this episode, she shares the deep perspective that one can only gain through facing life's challenges. Dimple Dhabalia is a leadership coach, consultant, speaker, and author, specializing in sustainable service across mission-driven sectors, drawing on nearly 2 decades of federal service in global refugee, asylum, and migration policy and operations. Dimple's work is grounded in a simple conviction that staying rooted in our values, our humanity, and our conscience is what makes sustainable service possible. She now partners with leaders and organizations in government, humanitarian, and nonprofit sectors to create conditions that support values-aligned service. Her first book, Tell Me My Story, Challenging the Narrative of Service Before Self, was named a distinguished favorite by both the 2024 NYC Big Book Award and the 2025 Independent Press Award, and was excerpted in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. In this conversation, we discuss creating a life of purpose and intention, even within our fast-paced and product-focused world. Dimple shares her own journey through grief and vicarious trauma, catalyzing her pain into life lessons to help others live with more balance and compassion. This episode is full of practical insights on living the best version of your life now, challenging internal narratives, and embracing your unique path. I hope it helps you in some way. Enjoy. So we're with Dimple Dhabalia, and I'm really excited for our conversation today. Dimple and I were connected through a common friend, and when I looked up Dimple and all that she's doing and her beautiful take on the work that she does, I was so inspired, and I just thought she has to be on this podcast. And actually, when we did our pre-call, we got into so many interesting discussions right off the bat, even just now before we pressed record. And so I'm really excited to have you here, Dimple, and I'm sure that everybody will learn a lot from what you have to share.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I keep getting excited every time we talk.
Same. So maybe we can start with you just sharing a little bit about your story and what's led you up to doing the beautiful work that you do now, and we can go from there.
So I was born and raised here in the U.S. My dad was born and raised in India, and then he came out here with all the people who came out in the 60s and 70s to, further their education. And my mom was actually born and raised in Uganda. Her family was part of the group that left when Idi Amin expelled all the South Asians from Uganda. And so she had only actually been back in India for maybe a little over a year when she met my dad. He had gone back for the marriage tour and they were introduced. The one thing that he had said to my mom was, if we get married, we will be living in America because that's where I live and I love America and that's where I want to be. I asked my mom at one point, you didn't even know this person. They met for 30 minutes and decided, yes, we'll get married. And he was talking about taking you halfway around the world. I just can't imagine. It's such a brave thing to do. And she often talked about how India wasn't home to her because she had grown up in Uganda. And she said that with my dad, there was a kindness in his way of being that really appealed to her. So they ended up getting married. And back then, within a month, she was able to come out here. And so I was born a couple of years later. We started out in Chicago and then ended up moving to Denver when I was 1 or 2. And I think a lot of kids of immigrants, we had a really close-knit Indian community where we would get together every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'd get together on birthdays, holidays. And they really were an an extended family. I think that experience of community really shaped so much of who I am, because there was never this sense of like, these are my parents and they're the only people that I will listen to. It was like this whole community that raised us and that took care of us. There was always this sense of like, we were never alone. And that was really comforting in a lot of ways. But sadly, my dad did struggle with mental health issues, and those really became more apparent as I got into elementary school and then middle school. So that was another kind of point in my life that really shaped the direction that I ended up going, because, back then, even now, there's still so much stigma around mental health. And back then, you did not talk about it at all, and especially not in the Indian community. And, with my dad, there was a lot of violence in the home, and we moved around a lot. And so it was really just very challenging. At the same time, you kind of hid behind this portrait of what the family was, and that's what was put out to the world. During that time, though, a lot of the things that we experienced, we had a lot of incredible people who were helping us, like therapists and healthcare workers, just people who were in service that really showed up and helped us navigate through all of that. And so I often look back and think that that was really part of what led me into a career of service, was seeing what an impact it can make when people are really in these vulnerable positions and you are able to offer them something. I felt like that would be very fulfilling, and decided probably at a pretty young age that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to serve in some way. So I finished up college and then ended up going to law school. And I joke that I took the safe route because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'll do policy work, even though I didn't know what that really meant. And I had this professor in college who he sat me down my senior year and he was like, "So what's next?" And I had no idea. I felt like I should know, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And he was really encouraging me he was like, "You should just move to DC." And I was like, "Are you crazy? Like, we don't do that without a plan, I think he just thought there would be a lot of opportunity for me here to figure out what I wanted to do. But yeah, I didn't have the courage to do that. I just thought, I can't move to a city where I don't know anyone. I don't have a job. Like, how would I even do that? And I think especially because of how we grew up, like there was so much instability as it was. It's not that my parents didn't encourage us. They most certainly did. And my dad, despite, the things that he was going through with mental health, he at his core was like our biggest champion. There was nothing that he felt my sister and I could not do if we wanted to. But we didn't have the mentors or people to guide us. And my parents, didn't know all those things because they were the first generation to be here. And so I decided to go to law school thinking, well, that'll buy me another 3 years to figure out what I'm doing. And it was fine. It was just hard and I didn't love it. But when I got out, I was really fortunate because I had found a mentor along the way who was in public service, who worked at the Attorney General's office. And she was able to put me in touch with the attorney who ran the section that represented the State Department of Human Services. And they hired me as an intern for a summer. And then the following year, they had a job opening. It was such a great fit because it was my first real feeling of serving in a way that felt meaningful. And what was interesting is the bulk of the casework that we did dealt with child abuse and neglect cases. And my boss, he was amazing and so far ahead of his time in terms of how he thought about his staff, thinking of us as human beings. And he used to be in plays and musicals around town. And so he would walk around 5:30 every day and be like, "It's time to go home. It's time to go do something else. There's nothing that we're working on that needs you to be here right now." And he was so much about you need to get out, you need to do other things because he knew how hard the work was. And he also made us do an annual vicarious trauma training. And as a new attorney, a young attorney, I thought it was ridiculous and why do we need this? I took great pride in being able to review my cases and eat a sandwich, It didn't bother me. And looking back now, I realized that was kind of problematic.
Right. Because it sounds like you kind of wore it as a badge of honor that I'm desensitized to this, or I can do other things and carry on while I'm reading these really
Horrific accounts of what people would do to children. And I think you really used the right word there, which is desensitize, right? Like I thought, oh, great, I am desensitized. I have this ability to compartmentalize. And I didn't realize like so much of the trauma that I had experienced in my own life growing up had basically forced me to put this wall up, right? And I hadn't really dealt with my own trauma.
Right.
And now I was like holding other people's trauma.
Yeah, I'm sure as a coping tool even for you, right? It was adapted
Definitely.
at that time to separate and be desensitized.
Definitely. And so even though I didn't understand the value of that training at the time, it planted a seed for me. And within a couple of years of being at the Attorney General's office, I ended up getting married. I was introduced to someone through a family friend, and he lived in California. So I ended up moving from Colorado to California and took the bar exam there, passed, and ended up getting a job at a tiny little law firm, like a private law firm. And it was terrible. Every day I was like, how do I find a different job? This feels so awful to me.
What was terrible about it?
I mean, first of all, it was very much my first exposure to the billable hours. It felt very like productivity focused rather than people focused. And having come from that space of service, I didn't feel like I was in service of anything. The firm specialized in real estate law, and it didn't have that human element that I needed to feel fulfilled. And then I also just had a boss that was not great. Like he was very verbally abusive to the staff. And in the meantime, on the home front, I was dealing with a husband who also was not great. And it was a really miserable 3.5 years of, again, just being in this space of a lot of verbal abuse. And it was just really painful. And it was also very strange because it was a family that had been in North America between Canada and the US for 40 years. And they seemed so modern, like when we had met them and stuff. But then as soon as we got married and I moved out there, it was all of a sudden like, oh, well, you're the daughter-in-law. So there was a lot of that dynamic. And it was really tough. During that time, my dad passed away unexpectedly. And that was kind of a tipping point for me. And I didn't realize it. I understand it now because I do so much work with grief, but I didn't understand the way that grief shows up. I just always understood grief to be like you feel sad and you cry. And for me, grief was also just like completely disconnecting and numbing, like not feeling anything. And when we were dealing with all the funeral arrangements and my mom wanting to go to India to do the last rites, and, I'm the oldest. And so I had kind of been dealing with everything and I hadn't had a chance to really like process. And so when I got home, I would cry. Like a week after I got home, I was at his parents' house and his mom sat me down and she was like, he told me that you were crying again last night and you need to understand that your relationship with your father is over and you need to focus on the people who are here now. And I was like, what? And so that was the beginning of the end. I was like, I don't care anymore. We ended up separating and getting a divorce. And in the meantime, I had gotten a job as an asylum officer for the US government. And that was my dream job, not just on paper, but like every day it was my job to sit down with people who had experienced some of the most horrific things you can ever imagine and be a witness to their story. I got to talk to them and understand what happened and then make a decision in their case. And it was something where I felt like I was really making a difference.
Yeah. And it was about the human behind the story, right? Yeah. I'm imagining that must have been so hard to hold or to take in. How did you do that?
Well, so once again, I put up that wall of professionalism. They sent us to this training for 6 weeks to teach us how to do like non-confrontational interviewing and creating the space to help people share their stories, all this stuff. But never in all of that training did they talk about how this could potentially impact us as the interviewer, as the person sitting like in other people's trauma.
Yeah, as humans.
As humans, exactly. And so I thought, okay, I'm putting up this wall, like this is good. I've got a little bit of distance. And so I was really good at my job and I really loved my job. But about 6 years in, I was in Zambia interviewing refugees, and it was a whole different experience. Like all of a sudden, first of all, these were honestly the worst cases I had ever heard. So we were interviewing Congolese applicants. We were interviewing protracted Burundian applicants, which are people from Burundi who were born in refugee camps and then who were subsequently attacked again. And then we were interviewing the last of the 94 Rwandan genocide survivors. And on that trip, I struggled. I was having the worst nightmares and really visceral, like reliving what I had heard during the day. I was drinking a lot as a coping strategy. And then I couldn't regulate my emotions. So now I'm sitting in these interviews, that wall has completely crumbled. And I am like crying as I'm asking questions and taking their stories in. And it was so intense. And then I would look around at my colleagues and it seemed like they were all okay. So then I was like, oh, well, there's something wrong with me.
Right. Like, well, if they're all doing it, then there must be something wrong with how I'm feeling when, I mean, from my perspective as a psychologist, you are experiencing valid emotion coming out, which is a natural process.
100%. And there was that element also of the vicarious trauma of it, right? Like the fact that I was having the nightmares that I was having and living through what people had told me about, like that, it was a lot. And it wasn't until after I got back, I was posted in Athens at the time. And so I got back from Zambia to Athens. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, what is happening? And I had this light bulb moment where I remembered that vicarious trauma training. And so I looked it up and I was like, okay, I think this is what I'm going through. But there was so much stigma. And there was so much misinformation about security clearances and things like that. So if you say that you have a therapist or mental health provider, is that going to impact your security clearance? Nobody could give you an answer. And so I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about it. And I kept it to myself. But the more that I read and researched and looked into it, the more I realized that this was so common in trauma-exposed fields. Right.
Yeah.
And especially in the humanitarian sector. And nobody was talking about it. So that really made me think we need to be talking about it. Like, why aren't we talking about this? And why am I feeling ashamed? Like, I haven't done anything wrong, you know?
Yeah, the fact that you felt like you had to hide away your experience and you were feeling that level of shame for experiencing emotion related to these very intense and horrific stories is wild.
It's wild, but it's so common. You know, like I think in the humanitarian sector, it was incredibly common. But since I, having my own company and working with all different sectors, like it's so common in the healthcare sector. It's so common in first responder communities, military, like it's everywhere. And so we just don't deal with it. And so when I rotated back to the US, I ended up working for our refugee program directly. And I ended up in a leadership position. And part of my job was to help prepare our teams that were going abroad. Like I led the team that prepared our teams. And so I was like, we're going to do this differently. We are going to educate our staff about this is the reality of doing this work. And if you experience these things, there's nothing wrong with you. Like you're human. And so let's talk about it. And so we created some modules to talk about vicarious trauma, to talk about this is part of this kind of work when we're exposed to other people's trauma. And I didn't have any background in any of this. This was everything I was learning as I was going. And then we started debriefing the trips to really talk about, well, what was your experience? What happened? And so that all helped. But then I went back abroad, this time to New Delhi as the field office director. And within weeks of getting there, I got so sick. I was taking over our biggest office overseas. I had one of the biggest staff, and it was the height of the refugee crisis. And so I was traveling all the time to Pakistan, to Sri Lanka, to other places in the region. My office covered 8 countries. And so when I was gone, the work in our office would continue, but nobody could sign off on things until I got back. So I'd be gone for 2 weeks at a time. I'd come back. I'd have a stack of cases on my desk that I had to review and sign off on. And then anything else that was going on in the embassy as the representative for immigration, that was my job to take care of those things. And so it was so much. And because I was gone all the time, I didn't have any friends there really. And so I had no social support either. And it was just stressful. And all I did was work.
Right. Completely burnout inducing.
Yeah. And so my body was literally starting to attack itself. And I came home just under a year later. And at that point, I was getting rashes all over my legs. And I had kept going to the med unit every time I was back home. And like nobody could tell me what was going on. And finally, I have a really wonderful doctor out here who does functional medicine. And so he realized right away what was happening. He's like, this is all autoimmune and you need to come home. And I was like, what are you talking about? I have barely been there a year and they spent all this money to send me there. Like, I can't do that. I mean, this is my health, right? This is my health. And this is my mentality. It's like, well, I can't tell them that. And he just looked at me and he was like, all right, well, you can come home now, or maybe you don't come home at all.
Wow.
And so I did finally tell my bosses, and they were very supportive. They gave me a bunch of options of things that I could do. And ultimately, I chose to come home. And I'm so grateful that I did because, number one, I ended up landing in a position as a senior advisor to the directorate. And in that position, I had access to our highest levels of leadership. And I really started advocating at that point. I was like, we have to talk about these things. It's not okay for people to experience this level of stress and feel like they can't say anything. And then just the trauma piece of it, we're still not talking about that enough across the board. And so it gave me that platform to start advocating and to start bringing in more programs and stuff that were rooted in mental health and really trying to remove the stigma and normalizing that this is part of doing this work.
Yeah.
But the other piece of it was that when I came back here, my mom and sister and my brother-in-law, they were all here in Alexandria. They were living here. And I got to spend all this time with them. And we didn't know. I mean, that was 2016. And 3 years later, my mom would die unexpectedly. And I just keep thinking my assignment in India was supposed to go through like 2018, 2019. And had I stayed, I would have missed out on all those moments with her and with my sister and her husband living here. And so I'm really grateful. But at the time, I felt so much shame, like, oh my gosh, I can't hack the work. And what are people going to say about me leaving, with just barely a year under my belt? I felt so much shame. And the new boss that I was working for when I came back, he was the head of the directorate. And probably 2 or 3 months after I got back, he sat me down one day to do a review. And he was like, when I found out that you were going to be taking on this position, he said, honestly, I didn't understand why we need this position. He said, I thought it was a waste. And he said, you have proven me wrong. Like, you've shown me what can be done if the right person is in this position. And he said, but I see you holding back a lot. And he said, and I know that you are carrying around this feeling like you don't deserve to be here or that people think less of you for coming back. And he said, the only person who is doing that is you, and you need to let go of it.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, we're all kind of conditioned around that idea that your work, what you do, is primary. And if you falter from that in some way, it's a personal failing. Like it's something you're doing wrong.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we have been conditioned to believe that. And so that was a really big opening for me to start thinking about, like, why is it that we tie our self-worth to our productivity or to our job title or whatever? Like, why, like, where did we get lost in that? Like, I'm a human being. I deserve to be just loved because I am human and I'm here,
Exactly. Yeah. I work with clients on this a lot. It comes up so much. Like, our self-worth is often tied to achievement, to work. And I see it as something that starts really early, like even from schooling, and the focus that's put on grades or achieving. And there's this benchmark that we're always striving towards. So it's interesting to hear you say that we are worthy. We all have worthiness simply because we are existing, simply because we're human, because that is a really challenging concept to have people hold.
Yeah. I think that conditioning runs so deep, right? Like I look at what's happening in the world right now. Dehumanization is a big factor in, I think, what has led to this conditioning. And I talk about it often in terms of the Industrial Revolution, right? Like, I think that that was really a turning point in cutting us off from our humanity. Yes, there was advancement and there was standardization and things like that, which is great. But it also was the point at which all of a sudden we had, these are the times where you start work, where you take a break, where you eat, where you go to the bathroom, where, and we started getting disconnected from our bodies. We started getting disconnected from our natural rhythms, right? And we started getting disconnected from each other because we were expected to be these robots.
Yeah, I'm imagining like lemmings, right? And you're just following each other and you're doing what you need to do. And these are the work hours, 9 to 5. And then you get ready for the next day, Monday to Friday, weekend, Monday to Friday, weekend.
Yeah. And I think many of us work differently. Our peak hours are different. And all of that was kind of taken away. And that model then was taken and applied across industries. And so when you look at that in fields like what you're doing or what I was doing, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because we are human beings and we're dealing with other humans. Like I say this all the time, that being human is messy, but serving other humans is messier because you have your own stuff that you're trying to navigate, and now you're holding other people's stuff. And if we don't know how to like set that down at some point, we just keep carrying and carrying and carrying until like we fall, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, like what we talked about earlier, it being prized to kind of desensitize yourself. I wonder if that's related to just producing more, right? Like sticking with that 9 to 5, because if you were not so desensitized, maybe you wouldn't be able to work as much as you do in that way.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people wear the ability to compartmentalize as a badge of honor still. And the thing is, we don't compartmentalize. People think we're compartmentalizing, but we're not. Like we're just shoving things down for a little while.
And then it comes up in different ways, right? It comes up through physical ailments. It comes up through irritability. It comes up through how you're interacting with people.
Yeah. Relationships. And the physical thing is so interesting because, I've read a lot about this, but I would love to do a study at some point or have someone do a study of people in these particular fields in terms of autoimmune, because everyone I know in my field has some kind of an autoimmune issue. And I think it makes sense because we are carrying so much stress and we were never meant to carry this much stress on an ongoing basis. And we don't know how to shut off effectively. And now because of technology, again, plus minus, we're on 24/7. And there used to be this literal disconnection. I was watching a movie a while back about when the State Department and the CIA and stuff first came into being. Like there were things that were important, but people left at the end of the day. And that was it. Like there was no cell phone, there was no computer, there was no, and the world survived. Like we went on. And so this idea that we have to be on 24/7 and coaching clients that I work with a lot of leaders and they talk about this idea of compartmentalizing. And I'm just like, no, like this is not going to serve you in the long run. If you want a long career, this is not what's going to help you do that.
Say more about why you say that to your coaching clients who are in leadership positions.
So I think number one, there's this feeling sometimes for leaders that we have to know everything, do everything, be everything. And again, like we forget our humanity in the process, right? We're still human beings. Second, we don't effectively compartmentalize. And so this is coming out in different ways. The number of leaders who are short-tempered and, take things out on staff. And I think a lot of that is because they feel this intense pressure to meet the numbers and to do this and to do that. So a lot of the work that I do with leaders is about, we have to be the ones to start normalizing. Like, I'm not going to send emails at 11 at night, or I'm going to give you the space to take time off if that's what you need because you have a family thing. Like I often talk about this idea of work-life balance doesn't work for me. I never use that term because balance already sets us up to fail. It implies that all things are equal and all things are not equal. And so I talk a lot about work-life harmony because it's this idea of like, how do we bring all the different pieces of our life together so that they work in harmony with each other? Because at any given moment, yes, there are going to be times where something is happening at work and it is more important. And we may have to work longer hours for that moment of time. But there are times where there are things happening outside of work that are important. And we need to give our attention to that. And we are whole human beings. And so we do not, as much as we want to say that we compartmentalize, we don't leave a piece of ourselves at the door when we come into work or we leave. And so whatever it is that's been weighing on us is in there somewhere. And if we don't address it, if we don't deal with it, it will impact our health. It will impact our relationships. It will impact these things that we are navigating. And the other part about life right now is that not only are we dealing with what's happening in the workplace, we're dealing with a world that feels like it's on fire. And I say this to leaders all the time because most of the leaders I work with are in service positions. As much as you are serving other people, you are also going through that thing. So like the pandemic was a huge example.
Yeah, exactly. That's what came to mind, especially as a therapist. It was an interesting place where you were dealing with the same thing that contextually that your clients were dealing with.
Exactly. And that's the interesting thing. Like, I really think that for those of us who go into these positions, there's often a mirror that's held up. So the clients that we're serving, there's a mirror to our own, whether it's trauma or whether it's certain issues that we're dealing with, it's mirrored in the people that we're serving, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we're all human, right?
Exactly.
So we've all had experiences of insecurity, of fear, of challenge, of whatever it is. I feel like that a lot in my work. Maybe it looks different or the intensity of it is different, but I can see myself in various clients. Yeah. And that's where it speaks to that humanity piece, right? Like we're all humans. And why would it be that if you're in a leadership position or a service position, that you would be seen as another species?
Exactly. I mean, obviously, you get into leadership positions because you have a particular skill set or knowledge or whatever. And yes, use that to help your people navigate their work and all of that. But at the end of the day, why should you not be cared for? I talk about that idea of challenging the narrative of service before self, because there's this whole school of thought like selfless service, but like selfless service is not it's not necessarily a good thing because again, we've been conditioned to believe that means that we need to work ourselves into the ground in order to really embody what it means to be of service. And I think that that is like, that's crap, right? You know, as well as I do, that in order to keep serving others, we have to be well. Like we have to be well physically, we have to be well emotionally and relationally. All those aspects of our well-being that make us human, they all have to be working in order for us to effectively be able to serve, whether it's in our work or in our communities or in our families or whatever.
In order to sustain the work too. So this links into something that we were talking about earlier around slowing down life to live it now. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think for me, a lot of this shift happened when my mom died. I really had this moment of like, what am I doing? I am in this job that feels really like I'm in this constant uphill battle to try to change the system from within, and it's not working. It was interesting. Like my mom was one of the hardest workers I've ever seen. And in the last like 6 months of her life, every night I'd go in her room and lay on her bed with her and we would just chat. And she would see me doing all this stuff and she'd be like, you need to rest. You really need to rest. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And she would say, what are you doing all this for? Like, why? you know? And so after she passed away, I really started thinking about that a lot more. And death does that. Grief does that to you because you have that dividing line of life before and after. And oftentimes the after feels like, what's the point of any of this? We're just going to die. So like, why am I sitting in this meeting with people droning on about stuff that I really don't care about, you know?
Yeah. No, it provides like a whole other level of perspective.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I really promised myself was if I leave my government job, number one, I am not going to use an alarm clock anymore. And that has been life-changing. It has been life-changing because I really listen to my body now and I get up when it's ready. And interestingly, my body is ready at 7:16 every morning. And so that was the first thing. Second was I don't want to go through my life feeling like it'll start when I hit a certain point. And this is not always easy. Like I have the intention, but it comes and goes. I think because of capitalism and this feeling of we have to get more and more and more all the time, like we work all the time and we're missing out on so much stuff. And we tell ourselves like, oh, when I get to this point, when I make this much money or when I get this title
or when I retire
then I will enjoy this or I'll travel or I'll write a book. And again, my mom, she was only 65 when she passed away. And this had been her thing, right? Like when I'm done working, then I'll be able to do all these things. And it just really hit home for me. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. And so like, I've really been trying to be intentional lately about thinking about I am living the most incredible version of my life right now. It's beautiful and it's filled with love and nature and meaningful interactions because the world is so scary right now and it's so painful right now. And it's easy to get sucked into this place of fear and isolation and that nothing is good. And I don't believe that. I think there's still so much beauty and there's still so much goodness. And we have to stay connected to that to stay hopeful. Because if we lose hope, then that's where like nothing else matters. And so a part of this was also to stay connected to that, to stay connected to the beauty and to this feeling of living life now, the best version of my life now, doing things that bring me joy. And it doesn't mean I have to go spend a ton of money. Like I love traveling, but for me, like I live in right outside of DC and we have so many museums and I feel like a whole new person if I just give myself an afternoon to go and wander through a museum, you know, and I find inspiration. I find new ideas. I love just the people watching of it, the colors, all the different things. And I think especially as a creative person, that is something that really fills me up. And then spending time in nature. A couple of years ago, I took a plant-based storytelling class and it was life-changing. This idea that nature is this living thing, which we know inherently, but we forget. And so, you know, going out and walking amongst the trees, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, I'll be like, when was the last time you went outside and just looked up? Because there's a feeling of awe that comes when we look up because we see how big the trees are around us and we see the vastness of the sky. For me, it gives me a lot of perspective, especially when I'm in my head or in my anxiety of like what's happening in the world. If I can go out, look up and remind myself of how, you know, how small I am in this big thing. Like I can't remember if we talked about this, but the Artemis 2 mission. So, you know, NASA sent up the astronauts. I was so grateful because my whole timeline was just filled with these incredible videos and pictures of the universe and Earth. And it's just, again, this feeling of like, we are so bogged down in the pain of this moment. But when we like go up to that 10,000 foot view and look at it from that perspective, it changes things a little bit. And we're able to kind of see things from a different place. And again, remember, like it's constantly moving. This is not going to be our reality forever. It will change. And I'm not trying to like put a silver lining around it. It's just genuinely like, this is not it. This is not it forever.
I mean, it can't be. Right?
Exactly.
That's just the way that the world works. It's the way that time works. Yeah, in our earlier discussions, we had talked about the idea of dialectics and holding two opposites that can be very true at the same time. And this reminds me of that when there's such pain in the world. How do you hold hope?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. A lot of my work revolves around moral injury now. And so I talk about this idea of moral imagination or collective imagination. And that is really this idea that we have the capacity to hold pain and possibility together. Like you said, two things can be true at the same time. And I think about this idea of hopeful action, right? Hopeful action takes courage. It takes the courage to stand in this moment and to stand up for what feels right and is aligned with our values. But it also takes that ability of the collective imagination of being able to say, yes, this moment is really hard and it is painful, and we could acknowledge that and we can sit in that together and we can envision something better for the future. And I think what makes that unique is we are in the present, like we are sitting with the present, but we're also looking to something better. When I wrote my book, I talked a lot about self-care. I define self-care as like regulating our nervous system in real time. So finding micro practices throughout the day to help us get back to the place where we can be in that state of rest and digest. And I do think self-care is important, but I have shifted in the last few years to say that I think that self-care must always go hand in hand with community or collective care.
Yeah.
Because as human beings, we were never meant to navigate all these challenges alone. We were always meant to do that in community. And our ancestors knew that and they understood that. And that's how they got through these challenges. But we know from the work that the former Surgeon General did that loneliness is this epidemic in the world right now, definitely in this country. And there's this conditioning that we have to prove ourselves, we have to do things ourselves, and we have to really be independent. But independence isn't necessarily a strength, right? Like we find that strength from each other. We support each other. And I often use the example of trees, right? When we look at nature, if a tree is wounded, it sends out signals to the other trees around it that it needs help. And they in turn respond through the mycelial networks, through the air, and they provide support for this tree until it's able to stand on its own again.
Wow.
And we're no different as humans. We need that kind of support, but we've been conditioned to believe we shouldn't. And so we feel this shame that like, I need people to help me. I need help with something. And we don't feel like we should be able to ask for that, but we need to be able to.
Right. We feel like we should be able to do it on our own. And again, it's some personal failing if you're asking for help or you're needing something more from people. So how do you live your life more slowly in this way, more intentionally, while living in a world that can be very sped up and very structured?
It's not easy. It takes a lot of intention. Actually, slow living was my phrase for the year. And the idea was that I wanted to enter this year slowing down in every possible way. Like I want to write more handwritten letters and cards. I want to go to more museums and see art and be in nature more and all of that. And so part of this is like, we have so many internalized stories around, again, this idea of success and what that means and what it takes to get there. I was actually just saying to somebody the other day that I have been in this place of feeling that time scarcity, right? And when we feel that time scarcity, that's when we are like, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to keep going, I have to keep going. And the difference is that because I do so much work around meditation for myself, and I've really, in the last 5 years since leaving the government, I'm so connected to my body now to notice little shifts.
Yeah.
So when I'm in this space of time scarcity, I can realize it right away. And it's still doesn't necessarily make it easier, but I know that when I spend time allowing myself to be in these spaces, whether it's going out to take a walk, we have this beautiful wetlands area here. When I go take a walk out there, I don't put my earbuds or anything in. I really try to just be present with like, what am I hearing? And what I find is that I need that in order to, again, be connected to that source of inspiration. And we need inspiration, I think, really to stay connected to hope as well, because we can't really think about something different if we're not inspired to it. And so I wish I could say like, yes, I am this slow living queen, but like it's an intentional choice every day. And part of that choice is, again, normalizing that is how we were supposed to live. That is how we are supposed to live as humans. We were never supposed to be exposed to so much. I just read this thing the other day that said we are exposed to more in like a single scroll on social media than our ancestors were in like a month.
I believe it. Yeah. And we weren't meant to be so accessible at all times, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it also sounds like normalizing that and validating that we are living in this world that kind of pulls away from the slower living and pulls us away from more intentional living. And so, if it feels challenging, like that makes total sense, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't insert micro moments of
Exactly.
intentionality.
And I think that's actually a really great point. If I go into this thinking, oh, I want slow living, I'm going to change my whole life, like that's not going to work, right? I think micro practices are always a good thing, whether it's self-care, whether it's slow living. I think micro practices are the way to go because they're effective, but it also allows us to stay with something rather than just giving up.
Right. And by staying with it in those micro ways, you're still practicing it and you're showing yourself that it's important to you to hold on to it, even though we're in this world.
Exactly.
So, Dimple, you shared that you are embarking on something new right now, and there's been a lot that's been coming up for you lately.
Yeah, it's been interesting because it's new and it's also not new in some ways. I think a lot about this idea of success because my path has been very different in how I've chosen to do things. And also, I don't feel like I fit neatly into a little box. Like I was telling you earlier, I really struggle when people ask me, what do you do? Because I do so many things and I am a creative at heart. And there's all these other things that I'm bringing into my work. But this piece around grief and moral injury, it is so important to me. And so I am about to launch a line of empathy cards. And what we were talking about in terms of community and sustained presence, what makes these cards unique is that each set is meant to be this ritual of exchange between two people. So even though there's 6 cards in a set, it's not for 6 different people. It's for you to send to one person over and over. And the idea is that it creates this kind of connection. Right.
Yeah.
So the origin of this was that when my mom passed away, it was like the day after the funeral, everybody was gone. And, you feel so isolated and alone in those moments. And one day I opened my mailbox and there was this big envelope and this group of friends that I had all sent me these beautiful notes. Like they had put it together in one envelope. And it was just these notes of encouragement and love. And it was really meaningful. And then the next month, I got another envelope, and then the next month, another, and it went on for 6 months.
Yeah.
And it made such a big impact on me. So I have been sitting with this for such a long time. It's something that I wanted to create and put out into the world, but I didn't know how because all the stories that were coming up for me around, like I started this business on coaching and consulting, and we always go back to those stories of what are people going to say? Like, what are they going to think if I'm pivoting into this whole different thing, And I am seasoned in my life. Like, I've been around for a while and it still hits me, right?
Yeah.
I do this work. I wrote a whole book about this and it's still like the conditioning of our internal storytelling runs so deep, so deep. And so again, the difference for me now is that number one, I can notice it. I notice when those stories are coming up. I notice how I feel when they come up and the things that I say to myself about everything, right? And I have learned to have compassion for myself around it.
How have you practiced compassion for yourself around that?
Yeah. So I have a lot of conversations with myself. Like I really do. And I used to teach a mindful performance class. And part of that was we talked about self-compassion and learning to talk to ourselves the way that we would talk to our best friend.
Yeah.
Right. And so I have really learned to put that into practice of noticing when I'm saying something really harsh or terrible to myself and immediately being
Yeah.
like, oh, let's see if we can
Yeah.
restate that in a different way. Or asking myself, is that really true? Because
Right.
usually it's not, you know?
Yeah, like re-examining it. And also, I think sometimes looking at, is that my voice? Like, whose voice is that? Yeah. Where is that coming from?
That is actually a big part of it for sure, because I think that voice has an origin and it's usually not from me. There have been people in my life who at different times have told me, like, oh, you need to do this, or you should do this, or you will never be good at this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And those are the things that stick. And then they like burrow in and then they become part of my story, but they're not my story. Right. And so
Right.
this idea of challenging our narratives, like I love this process so much because in my book, I talk about we have these shaping stories that most of them have started in childhood. They've
Mhm.
created those neural pathways. That is why the conditioning is so deep. And they've created our survival responses. This is why we react the way that we do in certain situations. But it's like when we can bring in that awareness, when we can bring in that compassion, we can start to make new choices because we realize, like, oh, that is not my story. That is not my story to hold or to keep, and I can let go of it. And I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to do. It's not like, okay, I'm just going to be like, whatever. But the more that we can keep coming back to it, we can rewire that. We can rewrite those stories and create new stories that are not only going to serve us better, but they're going to help us serve others better.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the work that I do with clients is shifting those narratives and those stories. And it is possible. And the first step is this awareness and acceptance of the idea that it's a story, right? It's not necessarily fact. And sometimes that can be the starting point, even just holding the possibility that what you're thinking or how you're thinking about it is not necessarily 100% true. And like you said, some of those ways of thinking or those behaviors were adaptive, right? They developed in that way because they served you at the time. I've been thinking about when you were talking about that desensitization, that was adaptive for you at the time growing up. And it's something that it sounds like you've intentionally tried to shift.
Yeah. And I love what you just said. And like with my clients, we'll sometimes do this exercise of we'll think of two coaches within us. There's the inner critical coach and the inner compassionate coach. And so we do this whole exercise of visualizing both, but also of expressing gratitude to the inner critical coach, because that critical voice and those stories that we tell ourselves are very much protective, right? And what I often say to people is those stories have allowed us to survive every terrible thing that we have ever been through, to allow us to get to this moment. So they have served a purpose, 100%, I agree. And we have the capacity to survive without them.
Right.
And to I hate to say thrive, but thrive without them, right? Like I often think about when I did my mindful performance training, part of it was we had to do this hike, this mindful hike. And I was in the throes of grief. It was right after my mom died. I was in the worst shape of my life. And I was in this class with all these elite athletes, and I was like, oh my God, I am going to be so embarrassed because I don't know how I'm going to get up this mountain, you know? And I started going up, and there was these switchbacks going up the mountain. So I played this game with myself. I was like, all right, I'm just going to go to the next switchback. And if I want to turn around and go back, that's perfectly fine. And I started doing that one switchback at a time. And then our instructor had told us, I want you to, along the way, stop and look at how far you've come, because we often rush right past all of that, right?
That's very true, yeah.
And then when you get to the top, to stop and really savor being there, because again, we rush past those like milestones. And so I did this one switchback at a time. I made it to the top eventually. And as I sat up there and looking out at this beautiful view, it really hit me. I was like, how many times in my life did I miss out on the metaphorical beautiful view because I told myself I can't do it. Like, I can't do this thing. And had I been able to do just one switchback at a time, instead of being overwhelmed with this story of you can't do it, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the knowledge, what if I would have been able to just look at what's the next little thing I need to do? to move me towards that, right?
Something that stood out to me there too is that you're saying, I will try to make it to the next switchback. And if I don't, that's okay. So it's you're giving yourself that level of compassion as well, right? Saying that I'll try to do it and it's okay. I don't have to punish myself if I don't.
I think a lot of it is the deconditioning of all these stories requires us to start by giving ourselves permission. And I think especially as South Asians, I think that's even harder because, again, going back to this idea of what is success in our community, it's challenging sometimes because there's still, it's very much tied to money. It's very much tied to what you can show, what you have. And so I think it takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, no, like I am going to live my life differently. And it doesn't take anything away from my success. I am successful in my own right. And so it's being able to define what success really means to you and then to be able to stand in that with confidence, with like, yes, this is what's true for me.
Yeah, it makes me think too about the ideas of success that are maybe more societal, like these are the steps towards a successful adulthood. You get married, you have a house, you have a job, you have kids. And what do you do when your life does look different than that? And that's kind of what we're exploring in this podcast. When you're living a life that looks or feels different, either by choice or by circumstance, then how do you push against some of those stories when they're so all around you?
You know, what's interesting is when you said that, what it reminded me of is when I made the choice to leave my marriage, my father-in-law, who I actually really loved, he was very kind, but he came to the house to talk to us. And he basically told me, if you walk away from this marriage, you will be miserable for the rest of your life. And I don't know where I found the courage, but at the time I said, I cannot imagine being any more miserable than I am right now. And then I never saw him again. But over the years after that, I did have those moments where I was like, oh my God, like, did I really mess this up? And I would struggle because, you know what? I didn't end up having kids. Like I am working on these, like this business and all this stuff. And it's scary because I don't have a partner to rely on or any of that. And so there have been these moments. And I remember when I would get into this really low place of like, you really screwed this up. Like you should have just stayed. And my mom would step in and she'd be like, all right, let's look at all the things that you've done since you left. Right.
Yeah.
And it is this idea of like connecting the dots backwards where we can start to see like, yes, I needed to be in California at that time because that's how I got this job that changed my life. Right. It's what allowed me to go out into the world and to be a witness to some of the most incredible stories of heartbreak, but also of the human spirit, what we are capable of. Like even in the hardest and harshest of places, we find ways to adapt. As humans, we are so much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And so she would walk me through like all the amazing things that I got to experience and I got to do. And then also all the lives that I changed because of that. And so that's the thing is like, it's easy to believe those stories that come from the outside and then become internalized. But we have to really stop and look and see like, okay, I am in this place. I think there's a real beauty in taking stock throughout the year. And it's like on that mountain to look back at how far we've come.
Yeah.
Because even if this feels like a challenging or painful moment, I guarantee that it's something like you've still made progress in some way.
Yeah. And it depends through what lens you're looking at things, right? I think sometimes when you're in the part that feels challenging, it can be hard to look back and feel like you're connecting the dots because the dots that you're seeing have not led you to a place where you're feeling in that moment good about. So we were talking about how sometimes looking back and figuring out what your story is can feel challenging for those reasons. And you were saying that it's not necessarily the case that everything, all the points have to coalesce into this, you know, this magical place that completely makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of it is being able to look at what were the key moments that shifted your perspective in some way or taught you a lesson, because those were the moments at which you then took another step towards this moment that you're in. right? And so that's what I look for is how do they connect? They don't have to all come together necessarily, but they're all connected in some way.
Right.
But I think the other thing that came up as you said that is I think sometimes when we do this, we still are looking at it through that lens of expectation, right?
Yeah.
And so that lens of expectation of this is where I should have been. Right. But I always say anytime should is in there, like it's already a judgment. So take the should out and see if we can look at it from this place of like, what is this moment giving me that I didn't even dream of? Like I couldn't have known that I would get out of this moment. Because part of being human is suffering. Like we are always going to suffer and feel hardship. But there's also, again, there's so many good things. And so, yes, you know what? I didn't end up having children. I didn't end up having a partner. It doesn't mean I never will. Maybe I will. I don't know. But at the same time, I have gotten to create a life that is really beautiful in a lot of ways. And I am able to make choices. And it's interesting. Sometimes I talk to my married friends and they're like, oh, I wish I had your life. You know, there's always this element of, oh, I wish I had what this other person had. And, you know, that idea of comparison is a thief of joy. And unfortunately, we live in this era of comparison because of social media.
Right.
You know?
And seeing the image, because that's what social media is. It's not showing the deep internal things that are happening in any person's life. And it is the lens through which you're looking. It makes me think about the idea of gratitude. And I think that's what a gratitude practice does is rather than looking at the things that are lacking in your life or the things that you don't feel good about, you can always find something to hold on to that you are grateful for if you are really just looking at the smaller things or looking at it through the lens of have rather than have not.
And, you know, it's interesting. They did this study with 94 Rwandan genocide survivors. And what they found was that what brought them joy and satisfaction was just little everyday moments, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. A lot of times we're also in this place of like, I need this big thing to happen for joy or for gratitude or whatever. But the reality is that there are so many little things. And that's why, again, that 10,000 foot view, right? Like I saw this little video about like, if you think about what it took for your ancestors to find each other and create the line that created you, but even going back further, what it took for the earth to be here, to stay on this axis and be in this block of space. Like when you think about all the things that had to happen for you to be here in this moment, it's pretty amazing, right? And so the little everyday things like hearing the birds or feeling the fresh air, you know, when I talk about gratitude practice with people, like I really talk about don't make a list of 10 things, pick one or two things, and that we have to really savor that feeling because we know, right? Negative things that we experience imprint on our brains immediately. But the positive, we have to savor that feeling for 12 to 15 seconds in order for it to imprint. And so with a gratitude practice, I always invite people to try to see if you can just pick one or two things and sit with that feeling so that you really start to feel it. And there's two pieces to this. There's the repeating it every day, right? Because we know that when we repeat this practice and we start to feel that gratitude, we broaden our perspective and we start to find more things to feel grateful for, right? But there's also this element of sharing that gratitude with someone else. And so I often will say, find someone that you trust and text them what you're grateful for after you have done your practice. Because there is something about, again, this idea of sharing our stories, sharing our experiences that is such a part of our humanity, of being human and connecting meaningfully on that level, that I think that when we can share these experiences, it reminds us, whether it's gratitude or whether it's our grief, it reminds us that we're not alone in that experience, that we are amongst others who are also going through that or maybe need to hear it. You know, sometimes when we're in this moment of just feeling like nothing's working, it's like every day when we wake up, we have an opportunity to reset, right? We can start the gratitude practice, or we can start the going out into nature for 10 minutes or whatever it is, right? Like there's nothing that is stopping us from resetting for ourselves. And so we have those opportunities. But again, it requires us to shift those stories.
Say more about that.
Well, because, number one, we have a lot of stories around all the conditions that have to be in place for us to do the next thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you can necessarily make a big shift. Maybe you can. But I think, again, going back to that idea of micro, resets can be micro as well. Like we can have little things that we're working towards or little practices that help us get to the bigger thing. But it takes starting, right? And so if I go to bed tonight being like, man, I really need to do more cardio. I'm not doing enough cardio. I am terrible at this. Forget it. I'm not going to do it. But I can reset. Tomorrow's another day. I can try again. If I don't do it again, okay, I'll try again the next day. Like we have this opportunity to rewrite the story in that way. That's the other thing. Like I'm in my 50s now, and to think about pivoting into this new kind of area of business, like it's scary. And I sometimes think, my gosh, like, is this really what you should be doing right now? But why not?
And where does that question even come from?
Exactly. Whose story is that, right? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where that comes from, but it's there, And so it does feel like, I should be more practical. Like I should think about maybe getting a job. But no, I love working for myself in a lot of ways. A lot of ways it's very hard, but like it's fine. I am going to make this shift. I'm going to see what happens. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. But I'm grateful that I have the capacity to do that. And I know I have the privilege to do that, which a lot of people don't. But if you're not in the position to do something like that, that's okay. But there's other ways. Like I talk to a lot of people who are like, oh, you wrote a book. I've always wanted to write a book. I'm like, let's just start writing. Oh, well, but I'm not a writer. We're all not writers when we start, right? Like,
and what's that story? That story that you're telling yourself.
It all comes back to story. Always.
It does. It does. So as somebody who has really charted your own path and it's taken you in a lot of different directions, I'm wondering if you have any tips for people who might be considering a shift that feels scary or leading a path that doesn't look like what they see around them.
Yeah, I still have a lot of stories that come up around this. But, I think, look, we have been told that life is meant to be lived in a certain way. And I don't think that that's true. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think that there are elements of that are true. Like, I think we are meant to be around people. We are meant to be in community. We are meant to do something that feels meaningful.
Yeah.
Right? Because when we are in jobs that don't feel meaningful, that's when we really start to struggle. When we are isolated and away from others, that's when we start to really struggle. And so even if you're an introvert and you like your alone time, that's totally cool. But there's an element of like, we need each other. And so I'd say think about what is it that feels meaningful and purposeful to you and build around that. And even though this world tries to put us in these boxes of like, oh, I'm a professional, I'm a lawyer, I'm a, whatever. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. If you don't fit into a box, that's okay. I don't fit into a box. Like I have tried to fit everything I do into a box and it doesn't work. Except I will say what's interesting about this new direction I'm going is that everything I've done over the last 5 years, all the research and the learning around grief and around moral injury, I am now bringing into this new work of building these beautiful cards, but I'm also being able to bring in the creative side, which is the part that I have suppressed for such a long time. And it is so inherent to who I am. And I think part of, again, the stories and expectations growing up around success, meaning you have to be a professional, you have to go down a certain path. I did all those things and I did them well, but they never felt good to me. And ever since I left and I started really like leaning into the creativity, that has made such a huge difference for me in terms of how I feel about myself, how I feel about the world. And so I think really connecting to what brings you purpose, what brings you joy, and building around that in whatever way that looks like. And if it doesn't look like what others are doing, that's okay. Because my guess is you're probably ahead of where the world is, which is often where I'm at. And, they haven't caught up yet. And that's okay. So you can be a trailblazer, or if you want to follow in what someone else is doing, great, reach out. And I think that's the other thing is like, There's so many amazing people doing amazing things. And I quite often will reach out to people, and some of them will talk to me, some of them won't. But I am always grateful when I get to have really interesting discussions like this, because you just never know. And so don't be afraid to reach out to people you admire or that you think you might want to do something similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not so much about what it looks like. It's more about connecting with the meaning or the value of it for you. So Dimple, where can people find you if they want to see what you're up to and maybe connect?
So many places. And so I have something called the Journal. So it's journal.rootsintheclouds.com. That's where I have all my writing and a whole library of amazing things. And then on social media, I'm at Dimp Story. And that's across all social media platforms. So people can follow me there.
Great. It's been so lovely to have these conversations with you. I'm sure we're going to be connecting more in the future too.
Definitely. Thank you for this. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Dimple. Thank you for joining us on Living with Dr. Monica Shah, where we discuss different ways of living our lives and finding fulfillment in a world that often pushes one. I hope this series gives you more confidence in creating and living a life that fits you, not the mold. If you like what you heard, and you're ready to feel seen, inspired, and supported in building your path, don't forget to hit subscribe. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and grow a community of people who are redefining what living means together. So please share and leave us a rating or review. You can also watch on our YouTube channel at Dr. Monica Shah and find episode notes and bonus content at www.drmonicashaw.com. Finally, follow me on Instagram at Dr. Monica Shah for more inspiration and resources. Until next time, keep living your unique life. Because no matter what path we're on, it's all just living, and there's more than one way to do it. I want to talk about the slowing down to live life now and redefining success. I feel like it links in well here.
Yeah.
I know, yeah, let's both,
Your hair looks so good. I don't know what you're worried about.
Oh,
You look crazy today.
It's been like doing these weird things.
It's so humid here. I don't know.
Yeah,
how,
really?
yeah,
Your hair looks great too.
it's so humid here.
You know what it is? It's when you notice one thing and then you're just like,
I know. I keep picking at it. Exactly.
Yeah. And I can feel like the hair on my eye. So it's anyways. So okay, I'm gonna go into that.